Hi, everyone, and welcome to the PriceLabs training session on portfolio analytics. I am Amber Prickett, a solutions consultant here, and I will be walking you through the portfolio analytics product today. Please note that this is pre-recorded. This portion of the webinar is pre-recorded even though you're attending live. We do have a member of the PriceLabs team that is on live and ready to answer your questions. So don't hesitate to put those questions into the Q&A box and you will get a live answer. You'll either get a typed live answer right now or they'll hold it and cover the answer in the live portion following this pre-recorded portion. All right. So moving right along, getting into today's agenda. So we're going to talk about what in the world portfolio analytics is. We are going to have a very short lesson on KPIs or key performance indicators, what they mean and how you can calculate them. Then we are going to dig into the two portfolio analytics dashboards that we have, which is the KPIs and historic reports dashboard and the pacing reports dashboard. This webinar will not be covering Report Builder. That's going to be covered separately. All right, so what is portfolio analytics? Simply put, it is a business intelligence tool to help you analyze trends in your bookings or in your own portfolio's data, right? So your own data. It can help you identify trends in your bookings that can refine your strategy. You can track and analyze a property's or multiple properties' KPIs, key performance indicators over time to find hidden opportunities to increase revenue. It can also help you discover underperforming listings to improve your overall portfolio performance. Cool. So this is the lesson on KPIs that I mentioned. So definition-wise, ADR. ADR stands for average daily rate, and it is calculated by taking the average of daily rates of your booked nights. So if you are new to the industry, a common misconception is that average daily rate is the average of your listed prices, and that's not the case. It's the average of your booked rates for a given period of time. Occupancy. Occupancy is the percentage of nights booked out of total nights in a given time. That's probably pretty straightforward, right? So if you have, 10 days booked out of 100 days, that is a 10% occupancy. RevPAR mathematically is your ADR multiplied times your occupancy. And RevPAR stands for revenue per available room. It is, by and large, my favorite of the KPIs. I think it is the one KPI that can give you the truest picture of performance, because if you look at ADR and occupancy alone, that's not giving you the whole story. A high ADR is not necessarily a good thing. You might have low occupancy, and that might mean that you're priced too high. You might have a high occupancy. That's not necessarily a good thing. That might mean that you are overbooked and you are leaving money on the table because you're not pricing high enough. So RevPAR is really great because it gives you the balance of those two KPIs, ADR and occupancy. Booking window is how far in advance bookings are being made. So it is when the guests are clicking book now, the difference between when they're clicking book now and when they're checking in. That's booking window. Sometimes you might see this referred to as lead time. LOS, or length of stay, is the number of nights booked for reservations, or really it's most commonly communicated as an average. So the average length of stay, average number of nights booked for reservations. Pacing is not specifically something that is calculated. It is illustrated often in graphs, can help you compare either yourself to the market or yourself to yourself over time, such as month-to-month pacing or year-over-year pacing, quarter-to-quarter pacing, things like that. Also, if you have different groups of properties, you may want to pace the groups against one another to see which groups are struggling and which ones are ahead, things like that. The point is to see how your performance is comparing and can help you make decisions with the context of these other key performance indicators. So, if you're pacing ahead of yourself and you're pacing ahead of the market, maybe rates are too low. If you're pacing behind yourself, historically, or behind the market, well, maybe your rates are too high, or there's something going on in the market where you just can't get the rates that you used to. So, all important things to keep in mind as we continue to look at portfolio analytics. Cool. So we're going to first jump into KPIs and historic reports. So I'm going to get into the product. So to get to portfolio analytics, you are going to look at this top nav bar in black, this navigation bar. You're going to click on portfolio analytics, and then to get to each part of portfolio analytics, you just select it from here. So you can click KPIs and historic reports, and it is going to load in the same window, but like any good cooking show, I already have it loaded. So this is the KPIs and historic reports dashboard. We do have a few options here and a few things to note. So you have your last refresh time. This is good to know in case so for me in this example scenario, last refreshed a day ago. So if I know a bunch of bookings have come in today, it's important for me to know that, hey, I should refresh by clicking here to get the latest reservations data, because I want to see the latest information, and I know I've received a lot of reservations today. Also, lots of cool filtering options. So what I've done is I've already preloaded my listings that have a sync status of on. I recommend that to most of my customers, because usually it depends on the situation, but unless you have a lot of listings that are turned off and you still want to know their performance, like maybe their historical performance because they're no longer active for you, you may want to have all of them in there. But if you have listings that just you don't want them in there for any reason, and it doesn't make sense to have them in there because they're no longer on your program, or maybe they're just not applicable, they're not STRs, they're not short-term rentals, not vacation rentals, they're like long-term rentals or something like that, it wouldn't make sense to have that data in there. So usually I will recommend to customers to, at the very least, filter for sync status on if they have quite a few inactive listings in their account or listings they're not syncing with PriceLabs. There are other filtering options. So really important to keep in mind that a lot of these options that show here are based on how you've set up dynamic pricing. So the tags that you've created and are using in dynamic pricing will be available here for filtering. Same with groups. If you're not using tags, if you've not created groups, they won't be here. There won't be any options to filter by those. PMS, the only time there's going to be multiple options for this is if you have multiple software systems connected to PriceLabs dynamic pricing. Listings, pretty self-explanatory. You can choose very specific listings to run a report on. Bedroom size is based on the bedroom size information that we have. And then city, same sort of thing. It's the information typically that comes over automatically from a PMS. Oh, right. So those are your cool filter options. If you don't want to filter anything, you can leave this information blank, and click Show Analytics. Once you've set your filters as you see fit, you can click Show Analytics, and it will refresh it will load with the report on those properties. Also, I should say, if you don't want to filter, you can just click All Listing Analytics right there now. So it's a cool new update. All right, so top section are your key performance indicators or KPIs, a lot of those that we just went over. The section's just showing you number comparisons. So a very quick pulse on how you're doing based on the dates that you're comparing up here, and also based on whether or not you're looking at stay dates or booking creation dates. Stay dates are when the guests are physically in your properties. Booking creation dates are when they're clicking book now for some future time period. So by default, it shows you year to date versus same period last year, so the exact same days of the previous year, and defaults to stay dates. And lots of different options here. So just make sure you scroll through. You can have a completely custom option. Same thing with your comparison dates. You have same period last year. Those are the exact same as the previous year. Same previous period would be if I chose this quarter. So you'll see that same period last year is Q1 of last year because I'm filming this in January of 25. If I did same previous period, that's going to be Q4 of last year. So Q1 of this year compared to Q4 of last year. So the most recent previous time period, same time period, same length of time, I should say. And then, so let's talk about these numbers real quick. This is the large number in black font is the value for this time period, this main time period you're looking at. That's how I think of it. And the number below it is the difference between the value for the same previous period. It will be in red if it's a negative change. It will be in green if it's a positive change. And we have the KPIs of revenue, average length of stay, number of bookings, average booking window, occupancy, RevPAR, ADR, number of active listings. This is something to keep in mind if you have a lot of growth with your portfolio and you also see revenue really grow. Maybe some of it's just from the fact that you have a lot of new listings. So that's why we always want to keep that kind of in your major KPIs to help give you context of these numbers. Now, when I switch to booking creation dates, you'll see that the KPIs change because it is a different set of data. It's also a different way of looking at performance, right? So if I am looking at the people that have just clicked book now, and it's only a little ways into January of 2025, that's going to be important to kind of keep in mind because this previous quarter was a full quarter of booking date. So it's not really like fair numbers to necessarily look at, depending on your flow of bookings and reservations coming in. So for booking creation dates, the KPIs that we look at are revenue, average booking window, ADR, average length of stay, and number of bookings, right? So just some important things to keep in mind there. Now, this is, again, just this top section, and it's just numbers. Now, the next sections we're going to go through, they are visual illustrations, visual graphs of these KPIs over time. And again, they are broken down into trends by stay date and trends by booking creation date. So when it comes to trends by stay date, it's important to keep in mind that these are showing when people are going to be checking in, right? When they're going to physically be in the properties. And if you have somewhat of a small booking window, and let's just change this back to stay dates out of curiosity. So if my average booking window, it's around 51 days, but just for this quarter, if I change and look at last year, same period last year. So just ignore that. This is fake data. That's why that's coming up. So my average booking window is really more around 30 to 40 days. So that being said, keeping that in mind, when I'm looking at these different lines and the key tells you the different years, right? The red line, the current year, is going to be trending down, especially since we're looking at this in January, right? So not a lot of people have yet booked for these future months. But it's important to kind of keep in mind, if you just want to see that generally you're kind of trending in the same direction, it's kind of helpful. Or maybe you don't even, you can click down here to remove some of these years. So like 21 was maybe a bit of an anomaly year. 22, pretty consistent, 23, 24. And 26, there's nothing going on there yet. So you may just want to see kind of how it's trending and see if there are any sort of adjustments you want to go ahead and make. Like May, for example, maybe I do see that typically I have a peak period in May, but is it peaking too much too soon? Am I potentially leaving money on the table? That's one of the ways you could kind of look at this. You see a similar trend for RevPAR for 2025, ADR, Now, occupancy, interestingly, is not showing that same May bump. So it looks like ADR is driving these up. So that's probably a good sign. Now, we don't want it to go too far. We don't want to see May start to dip down. So ADR is something we probably want to keep an eye on and make sure that we're not pricing things too high. Now, a couple different options here. I prefer to look at trends by month, but you can look at trends, weekly or even daily. It gets pretty messy. If you're in a market that you see a lot of day of week trends, like a lot of like Saturday to Saturday stays, things like that, it might be helpful to look at day of week. You also have more options here where you can download this information into CSVs. And each of these charts, if you want to look at more than revenue, RevPAR, occupancy, and ADR, you can change here and look at maybe booked nights, number of active listings in case that's helpful, check-ins and check-outs, things like that, the different options here. All right, so trends by booking creation date. Again, similar options to how you want to aggregate the data, and then more options of being able to download this into a CSV. So a lot of times, primarily when you're thinking or looking at trends by booking creation date, you're focusing on things like revenue and ADR. I would argue that maybe RevPAR is not an option, but like, average length of stay might be a good option to take a look at in case like your booked nights is starting to fall down or peak or whatever. You might want to take a look at how that's panning out together. But going back to revenue and ADR, if you're anticipating certain goals for booking creation dates, it's something to kind of keep in mind and see if there's any anomalies happening, right? I'm based in Panama City, Florida. In our area, we typically have what we call booking season, where we get the majority of our bookings the first few months of the year for the rest of the year. Primarily for peak season, the warm summer months, we get a lot of those bookings happening in the first part of the year. We also get our spring break already happening first part of year too. So we get a lot of, data for booking creation data very early on. So, if I was looking at data for Panama City, it would probably look a little bit different than this. But again, it's things that you want to keep in mind. Sometimes looking at it by day of week can be helpful too. And maybe we'll look at bookings. So if you saw, if you're trying to staff your call center that take direct bookings over the phone, you may want to keep this in mind. So like when looking at maybe 2025 doesn't have enough data yet. But for, 2024, it's interesting because 2024 kind of like flattened out. There wasn't a big difference. But what we saw in 23 were a lot of people clicking book now on Thursdays and Saturdays. So making sure you have enough staff on the phones on like Thursdays and Saturdays, sometimes that data can be helpful to look at that way. All right. Next, we have the length of stay and booking window trends. It can help you with your minimum stay strategy and potentially last minute discounts if you do see an uptick in last minute bookings. So let me show you some options here. You can completely custom select the dates that you're looking at. It by default shows the previous 30 days. And it's looking at booking creation dates by default too. But let's say, for example, I want to just look at, the bookings that have come in so far this month. And you can either look at it by total nights or booked nights by booking window and length of stay, which is actually just stacking these two pieces of information. Right now, they're in two separate charts. This is the booking window data, and it's saying, hey, the bookings that have come in so far, primarily they're booking 1 to 2 months in advance, and for 3 to 4 nights in terms of length of stay. So now if I stack this information, it's going to essentially show me the same thing, but it's a different way of looking at it. So again, you'll see that the most common booking window so far is 1 to 2 months, but it breaks down those lengths of stay for those people that are booking 1 to 2 months in advance. And you'll see a lot of 2 and 3 to 4 day, actually more 2 than 3 to 4, even though 3 to 4 is the overall most common that has come in. So it's kind of interesting when you kind of break down the data that way. So again, it can help you with your minimum stay strategy, and potentially last minute discounts if there are last minute strategy. If there are a lot of bookings coming in last minute, what adjustments can you make? Always want to think about what adjustments you can make. Cool. So last but not least for this dashboard, we've got listing level metrics. Now, listing level metrics, this chart is primarily incredibly helpful for large portfolios. When you're managing hundreds of properties, it can be difficult to make sure that no one is falling through the cracks. You typically are kind of, depending on how you conquer it, you might be playing a little bit of triage. You might be looking at your top performers, your underperformers, and really focusing on making adjustments for them. Making sure the top performers aren't leaving money on the table, make sure the underperformers, well, there's a number of different things you can do for an underperformer. Maybe it's priced too high. Maybe it's a photo issue. Maybe it's a description issue. Maybe it's a listing placement issue. It can be things other than revenue. But what about the ones in the middle? That is where I personally found it to be challenging as a revenue manager to make sure they continued to perform well, right? So this is a scatter plot chart. And you can custom select your day range here again. And you can compare. So let's actually look at last month. And you can compare 2 different KPIs. And actually, let's do last month through today. Last month. There we go. December 1st through January 17th. And you want to look at listing occupancy. Now, by default, it shows listing occupancy versus market occupancy, and that just generally can show you, hey, how are people measuring up compared to the market? But what I like to look at is like listing occupancy versus days since last booked. So maybe, they had or have a healthy occupancy, but it's been a long time since they've booked. So kind of what's going on with them. And what you can do is actually draw a box, say around these. If you're like, hey, what's going on with these? It's been a long time since they last booked and they have decent occupancy. So I'm going to draw this square, and then this list will update here to these specific listings. And you can dig into the different KPIs in more detail in this chart. Double click to reset it, and you can focus on like just this one or just these 2. And this one, you may already know what's going on with this one. Usually when there's like one, it's just kind of out on its own, there's probably something that you already know about it. But still, you can hover over one and just kind of see which listing it is. And again, kind of see all the details there. But if you do want to have it updated in the chart, you just draw around it. And then you can see like it hasn't booked since September of last year. Cool. You also, the colors by default is showing you based on city, but maybe you're all in the same city, maybe doing things like group. I mentioned group, kind of seeing how groups measure against one another, but also bedrooms. Bedrooms is another way to look at it too. Like how are my large, properties doing compared to my, small properties, and just giving you kind of general pulse, on that. So again, just for a quick recap, listing level metrics help in figuring out which listings to tackle out of your entire portfolio, how listings are doing in comparison to the market, or like I mentioned, occupancy versus days since last booked. Maybe they have healthy occupancy, but they're not booking anymore. So what's going on there? What levers to pull for the properties that are trending behind, or, like I said, kind of, haven't booked in a while. So what's going on with them? Cool. So that, last but not least, I will say that you can export a this information into a PDF if you want to present this information to someone. So know that that's an option for both of these dashboards, actually. All right, so going back to the deck real quick, just again summarizing the KPIs and historic reports dashboard. Helps you compare historical performance against another period, understand performance by stay date versus booking creation date, create minimum stay strategies with the length of stay and booking window trends, help prevent listings from falling through the cracks across large portfolios. Cool. Now we're getting into the pacing reports. And again, just like any good cooking show, I'm going to show you how you get there. You click on pacing reports, it will load within the same window. But I already have it open here. I am again going to do sync on and show analytics. So now you get to see how that loads. Cool. And so pacing, again, when we were talking about it with the definitions of KPIs, pacing isn't described with a specific number. It's more described in words. Am I pacing ahead of myself? Am I pacing behind myself? Am I pacing better, pacing worse? Pacing ahead of the market, behind the market, better, worse, etc. So a couple options. So these options are the same at the top as the other dashboard, but right here, you have these options for how you're looking at these pacing charts. Again, aggregate monthly, weekly, or daily. Date selection, so a lot of different date options, some cool ones like last 3 months compared to next 3 months. I'm going to select next 1 year. And market dashboard. So if you don't have a market dashboard or you don't select a market dashboard, this information is just going to be for your own portfolio, comparing yourself to last year today. So last year today, because it's January 17th of 2025, is comparing to how I was doing as of January 17th, 2024, last year today. For example purposes, to show you what it looks like with Market Dashboard, I am going to go ahead and select a Market Dashboard. And I'm going to leave it on all bedrooms, but there are different comp sets here. So your custom comp sets will populate here. And then you can do by bedroom category too. I'm just going to leave it on all for the sake of this example. Also, this example data has all different bedrooms in it. So this first chart is showing you the listed prices. So these are the PriceLabs recommended prices in the dotted gray line. If you're using dynamic pricing, it's the last seen price, last synced price is what that's showing. And then the different colors are from this market dashboard data. Similar to what you see in the neighborhood data tab within the dynamic pricing product, the gray area is showing you the range of the 25th to 50th percentile. Dark pink is the range of the 50th to 75th percentile. And the light pink is the range of the 75th to 90th. And with showing your last seen price, you can see how you're comparing in an aggregate way if you're pulling many listings, right? So keep that in mind, that if this is your whole portfolio, various bedroom sizes, it's going to take the average of all of them. So you can be very specific with how you filter your data and be very specific with your comp set. So you're comparing apples to apples, and it will be a more detailed and applicable story. Cool. So listed price is, I think, pretty self-explanatory. So you can see that, like in this example scenario, I'm mostly, for the close in dates, I'm hovering right around that 25th percentile. Then I start to get a little bit higher towards the 50th percentile. And then, towards the end of the year, I'm above that 50th, kind of halfway in between the 50th and 75th percentile. Cool. Now, these next charts are your major KPIs: your occupancy, your ADR, and your RevPAR. The gray lines are going to be your data. The red lines are the market data. Solid gray, that's the current data, right? So as of today, the dotted gray or dashed gray is as of last year today. So see how you're pacing in comparison to the exact same point last year. And market data, solid current data versus dashed or dotted red line is last year today for the market. You can even add calendar unavailable in case that's, important for you to track, or the unavailable dates. Click anything to get rid of it. So if it's too much information to have last year's data, click on those and they'll remove it. They'll be removed from this graph. And then a couple other options. You can add pickup. That is going to be, and it'll explain to you right here, there's two lines. The blue line is the market pickup in the last 7 days. The pink line is your pickup in the last 7 days. And then you can even see final last year, both for your data. I'm going to remove those. Both for your data, last year final, slightly different line here in gray. And so you can compare how that is measuring up to your data. And again, if you wanted to just remove some of the occupancy information from the market, or the market occupancy information from the graph, you can do that too. You can also zoom in. So if I really wanted to see, now I'm going to remove last year's data. Let's see, maybe I really want to hone in on what's going on. These dates, I can click and drag in a diagonal direction, create a little box, and I'm going to zoom in just on those dates. And you can hover over certain days to see exactly how they separate out. Double click to reset it. I should have reset. I don't know. Let's see. It's still showing monthly. Just dots. Yeah. It's still the same information, just, slightly different with the look to it. It could also be because this is dummy data as to why it kind of looked weird. But we're going to move right along anyway, so don't worry about it. The next graph is your ADR. And same sort of deal where the market data is in the red and your data is in the gray. And usually ADR data, particularly based on the size of the data set, and when it's looking into the future, it's going to probably jump around quite a bit for your portfolio, because the market is, in most cases, going to be pulling a larger data set. It's going to be less jumpy because there's more information, so less outliers, and it's a more constant trend line. Hopefully that made sense. But sometimes it can be good to see whether or not you're priced way above the market, or you're getting bookings, right? So this is what's booked. Your bookings are coming in at a much higher price point than what we're pulling from the market. And if your occupancy is low, but, kind of like right here, I see what it did. It didn't show. It shows like past data. So, and it's kind of scrunching 2025. But that's fine. So, looking sort of July on, I've got low occupancy numbers, and, July on, it's jumping a little bit around, but, just want to look out to see if whether or not maybe I have priced things too high and it's affecting my occupancy. It's keeping my occupancy low. Moving right along to RevPAR. So this is going to be the balance between the two. And again, looking for anything that can help you make a decision. So based on pacing. So I'm seeing November in particular is pacing ahead. Well, what's driving that? Is that ADR? It might be the ADR because it looks like the occupancy is low. So it looks like just because like maybe you've got one booking in here and the ADR is quite high, that might be what's causing that trend line to pop up for November. So again, maybe you need to back off of some of those November rates. Or maybe you want to hold on to them because it's only January and see if you can continue to book, but certainly something you want to keep your eye on. Now, July is one I also see kind of popping ahead of yourself and ahead of the market. So again, I'm going to come up here and see that maybe it's being primarily driven by ADR. However, when I look at the ADR compared to last year, I'm actually lower. So maybe when I look at July, my occupancy is up. So that looks like it's being driven by occupancy. And again, think to yourself, is this something you're okay with? Could you potentially be potentially leaving money on the table? Or maybe last year you weren't happy with how July trended, and maybe you are okay with it trending up. That's a good sign to you that you've made the right decisions for your rates and so far this year. Things like that. So those are just example situations. You probably, because this is fake data, it's a little more difficult for me to draw context. But if you have specific questions on your own data, and you're not necessarily understanding what you're seeing as you're following along with this webinar today, pop those into the Q&A box and let our team member know so they can help you out. All right. So the next section of this dashboard is booking curves. Now, booking curves are a different way of looking at KPIs. The booking curves are showing you how the KPI is evolving over time. 0 means that this month has completed. So it's looking at December 24, and yes, it's come to completion. This January line is showing that there are 13 full days left in January of 2025. That is why it's ending there, because we're not yet to 0, right? So it's showing you, from about a year in advance until the month comes to completion. And what you want to see here now, if you're in a market, an urban market in particular, where there's not a lot of difference month to month, you kind of have similar occupancy overall month to month. Looking at the booking curves and the default current months, it can be helpful. You can see very clearly like which months are pacing ahead, which ones are pacing behind. If you're in a seasonal market, it's not going to make sense when you look at it. So what I recommend is clicking on the pink button here, and instead of looking at current months, do custom. Now you can just select a month from this drop down, or you can do completely custom dates. So I can just look at like the next 6 months from today if I wanted to versus corresponding last year, click apply. And the dashed line is going to be last year's data. The solid sort of maroon line is this year's data. If I was in a seasonal market, I would probably want to go ahead and take a look at my summer season. So I'm going to look at this day through this day corresponding last year. Also, there's you can do custom dates here as well. But I'm just going to leave it as corresponding, click apply. And so I can go ahead and see, okay, this is how the summer months are pacing. And I so far am pacing ahead in revenue. Well, let's look at these other charts. Occupancy, right? So occupancy is just a smidge ahead, but mostly neck and neck. And then ADR again. So ADR is going to be kind of bouncy and all over the place. But overall, what I see is this ADR is kind of coming down a little bit, right? But the occupancy is starting to pace up. And so that's probably what's driving this revenue to be up. Again, it's early on for these particular summer months. So there's time for this ADR to kind of balance out. And, when we're looking at occupancy, we're looking at occupancy here. Occupancy is quite low. So, plenty of time for that line to kind of even out. But still something you probably want to keep an eye on if you're in a summer high market. And then RevPAR again. Now the RevPAR line is going to look basically exactly like the revenue line. It's the same sort of trend. So just kind of keep that in mind. And yeah, so that's the evolution of performance. Those are the different ways that you can look at the different days. And in summary, we have, the pacing reports help you understand your performance relative to the same time last year, or compare your performance against the market, as well as help you visualize the evolution of performance with our booking curves. And with that, the pre-recorded portion of the webinar is over. Input those questions into the Q&A box and have them answered live right now. Or if you need additional help, drop us a message to support@pricelabs.co. Thank you so much and take care.